All right, I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys. It is 10:30 right now. I just got off work. I just finished an energy drink. I'm all over the place. I have a lot of things I want to talk about in this video, so I'm going to try to make it as organized as possible, but please bear with me. Let's get through this together. I really wish that I would be able to sleep tonight, but I don't think that's going to happen. So let's talk about Pet Semetary instead. Hey guys, my name is Miranda. Welcome to my universe. Today, if you couldn't already tell, I'm not gonna take my shirt off. Why would you ever think that? I'm really sorry. But today, we are going to be talking about the first ever Stephen King book I read, and also the first Stephen King book that I have read a second time. I don't usually reread books. It's a very rare occurrence for me. It takes a lot for me to pick a book up a second time and tell myself, yes, let's read again. It's also interesting because for those of you who have been around my channel, have watched some of my videos, you have probably heard me talk about this a million times. So if you don't want to hear me talk about my history with Pet Semetary again, I'll have a timestamp down below. It'll take you straight to my thoughts now and the actual review. For those of you who have decided to stay here with me and listen, I'll give you a brief history lesson. When I turned 18 years old, my mom gave me Pet Semetary. It's the first ever Stephen King book I owned, first ever Stephen King book I read. I was terrified to read it, okay? I had to prepare myself for reading it just because everybody talked about it. Everybody talks about Stephen King, you know, like he's known as the king of horror. So I love scary things. I love scary movies. It's like my favorite genre. And I've read horror books before, but they were all young adult. So I was terrified of Pet Semetary. But when I turned 18, I told myself, I'm an adult now. I'm going to read adult horror. I'm going to get through this. When I read it, first of all, I was really sick. I stayed home from school for 2 days and I binge read the book. And second of all, I was severely disappointed. I feel like a lot of people just hyped it up and I feel like I was not scared. I was disappointed in the characters. I liked the plot, but I feel like Stephen King, when I first read it, I have very different opinions now, but when I first read it, I thought that there was a lot of nonsense explaining, which is not new to Stephen King. He does really like description, but when I read it the first time, I really disliked that. Overall, gave it 3 stars, so it was still good. I was just very disappointed in what I was reading. But here's the thing about Pet Semetary. If you've ever read it, you would know that the cemetery itself calls to people. When you think that you have put it in the back, deep dark corner of your mind and you will never think about it again, its little voice whispers out through the shadows and reaches you and it says, "You can't ignore me forever." And that is exactly what it did to me. Exactly what this book did to me. It sat on my shelf and I thought I was going to get rid of it. But I never did, because now I have a Stephen King collection, because even though I was disappointed with Pet Semetary, I decided to pick it up and I loved it. And so I started reading more of his books. Pet Semetary did not stop me from reading Stephen King, which I thank God for because I love Stephen King, one of my favorite authors now. But I kept Pet Semetary on my shelf, you guys. And for the past few weeks, I would take notice of it. I don't know if this happens to other people, and I'm just blabbling on at this point. But when I walk in my room, I know what book to read by which book I keep looking at. And Pet Semetary kept popping out at me. I kept thinking about it and I was like, what the heck is happening? I think I need to read this book again. I'm very glad I did because now I love it. I have a shirt to prove it. I love this book. It is so rich with so many themes, so much symbolism. I kind of went insane. Let's talk about it. For those of you who do not know what Pet Semetary is about, I feel like I should probably explain. Pet Semetary follows around this family of 4 in Ludlow, Maine, who just moved into this new house, and the Pet Semetary happens to be right in the property behind them. It's just a cemetery that a bunch of children have buried their pets in who live in the town. It's kind of like they take care of the cemetery, they make sure it is clean, lively, and it's just filled with pets. It's pretty innocent, right? We follow around our main character, Lewis Creed, as he discovers something about Pet Semetary. In fact, it's about the burial grounds beyond Pet Semetary, because you have the normal cemetery, but if you keep walking, there's this special burial ground that has been known to the native people as a haunted place. Turns out, if you bury anybody in the burial ground beyond Pet Semetary, whatever you bury into the ground rises again. So, with this newly acquired knowledge, we follow around Lewis Creed, his family, the rest of our characters, as they undergo very big life changes, decide to meddle with the Walking Dead, if you will. Anyways, okay, let's talk about why I loved this book so much a second time around. I read this book because I wanted to. I didn't read this book because I wanted to read Stephen King. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of like when you want to read and you're kind of like, any book will do, so you pick up any book, versus when you actually want to read a specific book and you end up reading that specific book. That's what happened with this the second time around. The first time, I read it because I wanted to read Stephen King, but this time I read it because it's Pet Semetary and I wanted to know why the frick people really like it. It has excellent reviews. And I was like, am I missing something? Girl, you were missing a ton of things the first time you read. What were you thinking? First of all, let's talk about the characters. Each character is so complex. And this is why a lot of people like Stephen King, because it makes very complex characters, very relatable characters. Characters that are not inherently good nor bad. They are very much like, you don't know if they're the hero of the story or the villain. And a lot of the times they end up being an enemy to themselves. This is what is so beautiful about Stephen King's writing, because his stories are enriched with these characters that have such realistic lives that end up being impacted by something that is supernatural. The amount of grief and how the different characters dealt with grief in different ways, and how you can either give grief the power to overcome you, or you can grow from it and you can heal from it. And the different ways that you see grief represented in this book are so powerful, so deep. Lewis's wife, Rachel, she actually has a fear of death. She has always her entire life. Something terrible happened to her older sister when she was only 8 years old. Her sister ended up dying, and she really has not dealt with that. She hasn't really let herself cope with that, so she has a very unhealthy and unrealistic image in her head on what death is. And so seeing how she has this completely different view of death than her husband does, who is a doctor. Lewis is a doctor, so he is very well acquainted with death, very knowledgeable on it. And just seeing their interactions and how they dealt with it in their marriage, and how they are so different, yet there is something just underlining that is similar. It was so cool. Like, I just could not keep up with everything that was happening, but it was like a good kind of like, I can't keep up, but this is incredible. Please tell me more. I want to know more. And I loved it. It was a perfect balance of, let's have all of this imagery and symbolism, but let's kind of keep them in the dark about it all. Like, some lines I would read and I would just sit there and just stare at the sentence and I'd be like, what the heck just happened? This book is so terrifying because, not because of like visual or actual physical things that are described. It is terrifying because of its exploration of grief and death, and how the way us humans encounter death and deal with it. I want to read something specific. This has to do with grief. The body lolled bonelessly from side to side, and a sudden awful certainty came over him. When he lifted his body up, it would break apart and he would be left with the pieces. He would be left standing with the feet on the sides of the grave liner with the pieces screaming, and that is how they would find him. It's interesting because that is very much how grief makes us feel. It makes us feel like we are left with the pieces. We are left to be, we are left alone with this brokenness, and we don't know how to deal with it. And so the way that the character ends up dealing with it is not exactly the right choice. And he ended up not doing the right thing. And it ends up ruining his life even more. And I can't stress this enough. My mind and the way that I see death as a whole and grief in general has been radically changed. And it's so funny because the first time I read this book, I didn't pick up on that. And I so wish I did. This book is incredible. I highly recommend that you read this. I am absolutely shook that the first time I read this, I didn't like it, because it's a 5-star book for me now. Thank you. Thank you, Pet Semetary. This is a Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill. I probably should try to go to bed now, considering it is 11 a.m. Thank you all so much for watching this video and for listening to me kind of ramble on. I love you all. Please be safe, make good choices, and I will definitely see you next time. Bye!